This case takes place in Germany on the 4th of November 2013. Upon hearing the details of this story, you may think it sounds familiar. That's because it shares many similarities with the case of Armin Meiwes. I thought I'd mention this at the start, as some of you might think I've heard this before and just click off. If you're already familiar with the case of Armin Meiwes, then you already know what to expect. Detlef Gunzel was a 56-year-old man who lived in Germany and worked for the Dresden police as a forensic specialist, a job that he had held for over 30 years. Friends and neighbors described him as friendly and generous. Detlef had 3 children from a previous relationship. He and his wife were divorced, and during this time, he had been in a civil relationship with a male partner for 10 years. Despite his polite and good nature, Detlef had a disturbing secret. He would often visit some of the darkest corners of the internet to log into websites involving fetishes and fantasies of cannibalism. For many people, this rather disturbing fantasy is just that, a fantasy, and these websites were created by those who wish to converse and interact with people who shared this similar interest. However, there are of course some people who want to take this a step further, and Detlef was one of them. In 2013, he would frequent these websites and chat to various anonymous people about his desire to cannibalize a human being. It was in October of 2013 that Detlef came across a man on one of these cannibal websites. This man's name was Wojciech Stempniewicz, a 59-year-old Polish businessman who had lived in Germany for over 20 years. The two chatted away on a website known as Zambian Meat, which described itself as the #1 website for exotic meat, with more than 3,000 registered members. The two men shared their fantasies on the website before exchanging email addresses and phone numbers, and had long conversations about the topic. They would often talk about meeting up and fulfilling their fantasies. However, Wojciech stated to him that this wasn't just a fetish. He really wanted to be slaughtered and eaten. The email subject contained the title Schlachtfest, which is the German word for a country feast after the slaughter of an animal. Detlef called himself Caligula. Caligula was a Roman emperor and was known as the Mad Emperor, and committed numerous horrific acts. And Wojciech went by the name Hesler Longpig. Wojciech had been searching various cannibal websites for well over a year, trying to find someone who would be willing to actually go through with killing and eating him. On a couple of occasions he was able to find some people who were willing. However, as I said before, most people didn't want to actually carry out their fantasies. Once they realized he was being serious, the other person would cut off the conversation. But it seemed that Detlef was indeed interested. In one message, Wojciech said to Detlef, "I want you to kill me and eat me up." Before too long, they decided to actually meet up in real life, and even arranged a date. The 4th of November 2013. As well as working as a forensic specialist, Detlef and his partner owned and operated a guest house in the mountainous regions just outside of Dresden. Detlef had converted the basement of this building into some kind of S&M dungeon. The plan was for Wojciech to come to Dresden, where Detlef would pick him up and take him to the guest house, where they would carry out what they had spoken about in great detail. The 4th of November soon rolled around. Wojciech travelled to Dresden, and Detlef collected him from the main bus station. The two then drove to the secluded mountainous region outside of Dresden, and entered the guest house. Now from here, it's not exactly clear what happened. Detlef has given 2 versions of the events that unfolded. I shall start with what he originally would later tell the police. Upon entering the guest house, the two went into the basement. Once there, Detlef consensually bound and gagged Wojciech. He then picked up a knife, brought it to his neck, and slashed his throat. Detlef then grabbed a container to catch the blood. Once Wojciech was dead and the blood was thoroughly drained, Detlef set up a camera, grabbed an electric saw, and began to record himself. He then dismembered the body, For 5 hours, Detlef cut up his body into smaller chunks of flesh. As he was cutting, he repeatedly said, "I never thought I would sink so low." Detlef then gathered up the body parts, carried them outside to his garden, and buried him in the soil. Wojciech actually had a fiancé, and after she didn't hear from him for some time, she began to panic and contacted the police. She stated that the disappearance was out of character, as they had recently been making plans for their wedding that was soon to be. The police went to work in solving the disappearance and began to look at the people Wojciech had recently been in contact with and searched through his messages. It was then when they discovered the disturbing correspondences between Wojciech and Detlef, and they were able to track him down. On the 28th of November, Detlef was arrested at the police headquarters where he worked. He was brought in for questioning and asked if he knew anything about the disappearance of Wojciech, and was presented with some of the messages they had exchanged. It's at this point that Detlef gave his first account of what happened. He told the authorities that he had sliced Wojciech's throat, dismembered his body, and buried him in the garden area near the guest house, and even told the investigators that he would lead them to the location where the body was buried. Investigators then dug up the body parts and examined them to determine what had happened. When they pieced his body back together, they noticed that his penis and one of his testicles were missing, both of which were never found. When asked if he had consumed Wojciech's flesh, Detlef denied that he had done so. But despite the lack of a confession, many investigators firmly believe him to be lying and that he did indeed engage in cannibalism. Police were also able to find the footage of Detlef dismembering the body, and upon hearing about the gruesome crime, Detlef's partner swiftly separated from him. And a chilling image of him wielding an axe next to a skeleton was shared by the media. In this image, he is wearing nothing but socks and sandals. The Dresden police chief told a news conference that Wojciech had fantasized about being murdered and eaten since his youth. However, Wojciech's fiancé had absolutely no idea that he held such disturbing fantasies. Due to the state of the body, the police were not actually able to determine the cause of death. Detlef then changed his story. He claimed that Wojciech was bound and gagged, but that he had hanged himself in the S&M basement. It was after he ended his own life that Detlef took a knife, slashed his throat to drain the blood, and then filmed himself dismembering the body. He fully admitted to his part in cutting up the body, but vehemently denied murder. The trial would begin in 2015. The video Detlef made of himself mutilating the corpse was played during the trial, at one point showing him completely covered in blood. He could also be heard murmuring, "I never thought I would sink so low." The prosecution also stated that despite a lack of physical evidence that he cannibalized Wojciech, they believe that it is likely that he consumed his genitals. Detlef tried to convince the court that Wojciech had taken his own life and had tried to present evidence that Wojciech could have stopped the strangulation if he wanted to. However, due to his original statement, and because the cause of death could not be determined, Detlef was found guilty of murder and guilty of dismembering a body. But because it was clear that Wojciech wanted to die, the court decided not to hand him a life sentence. Instead, he was sentenced to 8 years and 6 months. However, Detlef launched an appeal and claimed that he wasn't able to adequately probe the claim that Wojciech had taken his own life during the first trial, and so a retrial was allowed, which began in 2016. Dresden's chief prosecutor said, "He killed and dismembered Wojciech to get sexual gratification, and then later to get sexual gratification by watching the video he made." Detlef replied by saying, "I'm really sorry. I'm partially responsible, but I'm not a murderer." Following the second trial, he was found again guilty of murder and disturbing the peace of the dead. It was also found that his original sentence was too lenient, and so his sentence was changed from 8 years and 6 months to 8 years and 7 months. The case of Wojciech is considered to be one of the most gruesome cannibal murder cases of recent times in Germany, and it's eerie how similar it is to the case that occurred in 2001. I did try to find further information about Detlef. However, there seems to be little information about whether or not he is still incarcerated or if he has been released. As always, if you're from this area and or know anything further, please feel free to comment below.